Without further ado, our last speaker of the evening, Mr. Kent Dodds.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm just going to double check. Yeah, you all can hear me. Cool. I'm not going to keep them on my head, though. I do need to plug in. And I didn't get a chance to check how my slides look. So we're going to hope that they look good. And you just wave your arms if they don't look good. Good? Okay, cool. Okay, awesome. I'm so excited to talk with you all. This is such an awesome conference, a really cool experience to be here. And I want to talk about bringing back progressive enhancement. We're going to talk about where it came from, where it went, where to go, where's progressive enhancement, why it's coming back with Remix. So my name is Kent C. Dodds. It's a bunch of stuff about me you can look at later. I want to jump right in. So for me, progressive enhancement was always about like JavaScript stuff. And I thought it was kind of a new thing. And so this was my first introduction to progressive enhancement. It's like, so let's say you're Domino's and you let users are trying to find where the closest Domino's to them is, so they're going to type in their zip code. But as devices started shipping with really cool APIs, like geolocation, we can actually start to feature detect, like what does this device have the capability of doing, and if it has the capability of geolocation, then let's offer that to the user. Instead of having to type in your zip code, we can just tell you which Domino's is the closest to you. And so for me, that was always what geolocation was. Like I said, I thought it was pretty recent, but it turns out that I said that's always what geolocation was. I meant progressive enhancement. It turns out progressive enhancement is like back in 2003. It was when it was first introduced as a concept, and the primary goals of progressive enhancement were pretty fundamental and also kind of reflective of the time. So basic content should be accessible to all web browsers. Basic functionality should be accessible probably to all web browsers. Sparse semantic markup contains all the content. Enhanced layout is provided by externally linked CSS, and same thing for behavior from JavaScript. And end user web browser preferences are respected. So these are the goals of progressive enhancement. This is what we're trying to accomplish. And I think in recent years, we've kind of taken a step back on some of these things. Instead of enhanced behavior being provided by externally linked JavaScript, the entire behavior is just because of the JavaScript. Same thing with CSS and JS. We've kind of kicked progressive enhancement to the curb a little bit. So I just want to convince you there is a big difference between JavaScript enabling the experience and JavaScript enhancing the experience. And I'd like to argue that it is way better for you as the developer and for our users as users if we use JavaScript simply to enhance the experience, make the experience better, and rather than just making it so the entire app requires JavaScript to run. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, like, hold on a second, Kent. Like, I can think of a lot of apps that just could not work without client-side JavaScript. And you're probably thinking about Figma. Well, I've got a surprise for you. Figma without JavaScript in the client. This is actually a joke. I mean, it does work. But nobody would want to use something like this. But Jenna was like the person who made me start thinking like, wow, there's a lot of cool things that we can do without even having JavaScript in the browser. And like, I'm gonna emphasize this a lot. Like, we don't actually care so much about JavaScript in the browser. Like, we don't want to just say no JavaScript in the browser, that's what we're going for. But there are a lot of really cool side effects that you get if you focus on a base functionality without JavaScript and then use JavaScript to make that experience better for the users. So the browser is actually really, really capable. So now I want to talk about Remix. I am the Director of Developer Experience at Remix. I'm outrageously enthusiastic about Remix. I love it, and that's why I joined the company back in November. And Remix is a web framework that makes it just really awesome to build excellent user experiences. And we're also going to take a little bit of a step back in time. I want you to raise your hand if you remember when To Do MVC was like a big popular thing. Yeah, okay, just a handful of you. To Do MVC was awesome. Basically, what it was is a very simple app that could be implemented in a bunch of different UI libraries so that we could kind of compare the different UI libraries. And this actually came at a time when progressive enhancement was getting the kick to the curb, because all of these UI libraries were focused on just do everything in the client. And that's actually around the time when I started in software. So I started with an app that was built in Backbone.js, and it was awesome. I actually really loved it. I thought it worked out really nicely. And now we have something that's even better, and that's Remix. And so I implemented, it looks like okay-ish. To be frank, the to-do MVC styles were not very accessible to begin with. So if you can't see it very well, they were doing their best. And I just wanted to preserve those styles. So let me make sure we're fully loaded here. I re-implemented to-do MVC in Remix, but I added a couple of things. So this actually has user authentication, so you can have like individual lists per user. And I did publish this or deploy this to production, so you can actually use this as your to-do list if you want. But we also have actual persistence, whereas the regular to-do MVC apps, it was all like stored in local storage and stuff. And so because of that, we have network stuff that we have to start worrying about. And this is kind of what I want to spend a little bit of time today going over, is how does that network impact the way that we build our web apps? And when we're talking about progressive enhancement, what impact does that have on that story as well? So the first thing that I'm going to do when we're talking about progressive enhancement, we're not going to throttle anything. We're going to disable JavaScript. And again, this whole thing, it's not just about having JavaScript disabled. There are not many users who have JavaScript disabled. But from a user's perspective, this actually does matter, because if you're on hotel Wi-Fi or conference Wi-Fi, or you're in going through a train, through a tunnel or something, you have unreliable internet, it is actually pretty common for the JavaScript to fail to load. So it'd be cool if your app still worked, even when the JavaScript failed to load, or if it's taking a long time to load. And so we have JavaScript disabled here. There's no JavaScript on the page, and I can say talk at render, and the whole experience still works. I can check these off. I can delete them. All of the experience actually works. And the way that it works is because Remix is built as a browser emulator. So when JavaScript is available, then Remix will do its thing, and it will take advantage of all the cool new tech and do a fetch and all of that stuff. But when JavaScript's not available, Remix still understands what the browser does. If you look at the requests here, I think that's probably still too small. But yeah, if you look at these requests, oh, and there it went. There we go. You'll see that they have a payload, and here we have to-do ID and intent. We want to delete the to-do. So the browser actually knows how to serialize these forms into a request so that the job can be done. And Remix just was programmed, created, so that it would understand this. And so what that means is that before the JavaScript is downloaded, that your application works, so the user can start using it right away, rather than having to wait for all the JavaScript to download and run. But that's like, to me, that's kind of like marginally interesting. What's really cool about this, and I want you to pay close attention to this, the reason this is so cool is because it is the proof that says that you don't have to worry about application state management when you're using Remix. Redux, Apollo, as cool as those tools are, you don't need them when you're using Remix, because we don't even need client-side JavaScript at all for the whole thing to work. And that is huge. Like, think about your application that you're working on, and how, like, as awesome as it is, I'm sure you're building amazing applications. Think about that and just pretend that you could throw away all of the code that has to do with application state management, which is probably like half of the code that you write. And that's what the code is like when you're working with Remix. Because if it can work without JavaScript on the browser, that means you're not doing anything in the browser that requires state management, right? Is that coming across, hopefully? That is huge. And I only recently, in talking with Ryan, we had this revelation. Like, that's why working without JavaScript matters so much, is because it's evidence that you don't have to worry about state management. Wow, that is so cool. So we're going to enable JavaScript, though, because we like JavaScript. There are lots of cool things we can do to progressively enhance JavaScript. And so that's what we're going to do here. So now that we've got JavaScript on the page, I can still make a new to-do, and I can check it off, and I can delete it and all of that stuff. But there's one problem. with this, and actually I need to go to the playground page here. So there's one problem, and that is if we actually, let's disable JavaScript again to get a preview of this. So JavaScript disabled, so no JavaScript on the page, and we're going to slow down our network to slow 3G. We're simulating a 3G environment here, and I'm going to say talk at render, and I'm going to hit enter. And you'll notice that in the top, I get my favicon is spinning, right? This is the way that the web has always worked. You're navigating, form submissions or navigations. So that's going to be a navigation, you're going to see a spinner. And same thing for when I delete it, we get that spinner. It's great. But if I go and enable JavaScript, and we'll refresh the page, get all that JavaScript on the page. Here, got to hit Command R, otherwise it doesn't refresh. I just missed the key. There we go. The reason that's happening, by the way, is because actually, if you're curious why it said not found, come talk to me. It's a web thing. Oh, the web. Okay, so if I'm on a slow 3G network connection, and now I've enabled JavaScript, so I've got JavaScript on the page, and I say new to do, I get no feedback at all. There's nothing on the page outside of what's happening in the network tab, which of course our users aren't going to see. That's saying, hey, something's going on. I hit check, we get nothing. So what we've done by bringing JavaScript along for the ride is we just progressively enhanced to a worse experience. So we don't want to do that. And of course, none of you would ever design something that doesn't think about pending states, right? Yeah, of course not. No, none of us would ever do that. So we're going to implement a pending state so that we can give the user some feedback. And I just got the designs from the designer. The pending state is we just want to have this whole line be kind of gray, and we have styles for that when the thing is disabled. So we're going to disable these fields. So I'm going to come in here, and each one of these is a list item. Each one of those list items is a list item. You follow? And so what I need to do is I'm going to disable the button when we're in a pending state. So when a submission is happening, the user just clicked on the checkbox, that's going to submit a form. I need to know, when is that happening? Well, remember, Remix is responsible for all of that stuff for you. So what you need to do is hook into Remix and have Remix tell you when that's happening. And so that's what we're going to do right up here, is we have these things called use fetcher. This is a Remix thing. This allows you to make fetch requests, so it's a fetcher. And we have one for updating, toggling, and deleting. And we're going to just find out, hey, are we currently in a fetching state for the toggle? And with the toggle fetcher, we can look for the submission. And this is going to have all sorts of information about what's being submitted, what the user typed in, if this is like a bigger form or something. But if that exists, then we know that we're in a pending state. Like we are sending a request. So if that exists, then we know we're pending. So let's Booleanify that thing. So now we've got a true or false, and we say is toggling. And now I can just disable the field. So we'll go into our button, we'll disable that. Disabled, true, or is toggling. We'll do the same thing for our input and for the delete button as well. So that's what the designer said. They just want everything deleted or disabled for the pending state. So we come over here and I click on that. And oh, you barely cannot, yeah, you can't see that at all. Hold on a second, let me make sure that we can see that. Here we go. Yeah, so you might not be able to see it, but I promise it's there. The pending state, because the light's in here. But there is a pending state now, and this is where we are getting into the enhancement piece of it. So before, we already had a pending state, like that was fine. We had the loading spinner in the favicon. But now what's better about this is I've enhanced the experience by having a local pending state. On top of that, I can also have a bunch of these on the page at the same time. So let me just add a bunch. We'll say 1, and 2, and 3. And now we'll slow 3G. And I can have all of these be pending at once, which you can't do that without JavaScript, right? Without JavaScript, every single one of those is a submission. The request will probably go out and it will probably work, but you can't show any inline pending states. And so that's nice. We've actually enhanced the experience by bringing along JavaScript. But again, the mental model is the same. I didn't change a whole bunch of code to make this work. I'm still not thinking about managing state myself. I don't have like a, on submit, then set the loading state, and then on when the promise resolves or rejects, I need to set loading to false anymore. I'm not doing any of that. Remix is managing all of that for me. And there's a lot more to this, but I am limited on the time that I have. So I finished, oh, actually, you know what? There was one other thing I want to show you, and that is, as cool as pending states are, wouldn't it be cooler if we tricked the user into thinking that it was already done? So when you favorite a tweet on Twitter, it's not showing you a pending state, it just shows the red heart, like instantly, boom, it's done. But of course, if you're on a slow network connection, then it's not done yet. But they're just optimistically saying, hey, this will probably work, so let's just optimistically say it's going to work. And that's called optimistic UI. This is a really common pattern for a long time. It's not a terribly difficult challenge to implement for the optimistic part, but the part that's challenging is what happens if our optimism was misplaced and the thing doesn't work. Like the tweet was deleted. Whoops. Now we got to roll back all of our UI changes and show the user some sort of error message or something. And that's the part that's a little tricky. So let's first talk about what does it take to make it look like that check mark shows up right away, and then we'll see about the rollback. So we have this to-do complete, and that controls the check mark and several other things about this. So I'm going to say, hey, if we're in an is toggling state, then instead of going with the to-do complete, I want to go with whatever it's toggling to. And so I can get that from the submission. The submission says what it should be toggling to. And so I'm going to say, hey, toggle fetcher dot submission. I want to get your form data that was submitted, and I want to get the completed state, or the complete state, and set that to true. Or if that is true, then I know that we're toggling to a complete state. If not, then we'll just go with the to-do complete, like whatever it is. So if we're in a transition, if we're currently submitting something, then let's just have our complete state be whatever we're submitting to. And that's it. That's literally all it takes for optimistic UI for this particular case. So now I go click, and boom, it's instant. I go click, boom, it's instant. And we can take this further and keep on going. The really cool thing about this is the rollback is actually automatic. So if I come up to my server code, which is in the same file here, and I say we're gonna do our update, or no, we're toggling the to-do. Let's say that on a random, or no, we'll not do the random. We'll just do, it's gonna fail. It fails. Now I come over here. We are refreshing. Sorry, when you're on a slow 3G network, things are a little slow. So I'm gonna click on that, and it instantly shows you, oh, it's checked. But when it fails, I didn't have to do anything to go and roll back because I'm not managing state. Remix is managing all that for me. So optimistic UI, here we come. We finally have time because we can finish our app so quickly. We're so productive with Remix. We finally have time to start adding optimistic UI and making our users' experiences way better. And I took the liberty of implementing optimistic UI for like the whole UI. Of course, I don't have time to show you all of that, but I want to show you what our experience can be like when all of this stuff is doing simple things like that. So I can make talk at render, and boom, it's right there. It's instantly there, but you can see the requests, they take like 2 seconds before that request actually finishes. I can say implement optimistic UI. And I actually added, and I can even check it off before the request is finished for creating that item, which like blows my mind that actually works. But it totally does. I can click on it a million times, just keep going, and I'm not worried about anything of what's going on while this is happening, because Remix is managing that state for me. Now, of course, your users aren't gonna do this, but look at all these requests. The Remix is like, oh, they submitted again, let's cancel it. We don't care about that anymore, we're sending this new request. So Remix manages that for me, and it always ends up in the right state. So if you're like, I don't know, race conditions and whatnot, I'm gonna click this 7 times, and it should be unchecked when I'm done. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's unchecked, and even after Remix automatically revalidates all the data for us, that's exactly what it is. And it's amazing. I could say, if I submit a to-do that says error in it, then that's gonna give us an error. So I'm gonna say 1, 2, error 3. And you can see all the optimistic UI going right there, but the error was like, oh, hold on a second, that one didn't work. So I'm gonna have you type that one in again. And all of this is done, like the entire thing when it's all done is like 600 lines of code for the whole app. The user authentication is like another 100 lines. That's it. So my challenge to anybody here is to take your favorite framework and try to implement everything that this app can do and see how you feel about it. I'd love to hear what you think. So really, and also like if you want to play around with it yourself, it's at remix-todomvc.fly.dev, where of course I don't have internet. but go there, you can log in, you can play around with it, and make the code better if you want to. Okay, cool. So I'm just wrapping up. In review, progressive enhancement is about accessibility. It's making your app more accessible to people who are on a slow network connection, who for some weird reason decided not to load JavaScript. There are people who do that, by the way. That does happen. But you know, it's okay to have JavaScript. But it's about making your application accessible to more people. And like, imagine a scenario where you've got your to-do list like, oh, I just finished that, but you're on a slow network. You load the app, and the JavaScript's downloading in the background, and you're like, check that off. Boom, turn it off, put it in my phone. I don't have to wait for the JavaScript to finish loading before I can move on to my next thing. Like, this has an actual impact on people. So the fact that Remix enables progressive enhancement is awesome, and it's evidence that you don't have to worry about application state management in your app, which is like really one of the hardest parts of managing or building web apps today. And so Remix drastically simplifies the developer experience because it maintains the mental model of the late 90s, of how simple that was. And so I guess you could say it's remixing the old with the new. So Remix is center stack. It's managing that network chasm for you, so it's doing things that you can't get out of a front-end or back-end focused framework. You have to have something that's going to manage that network chasm for you. And working without JavaScript is just as much about DX as it is about UX. That's everything that I have to share with you. Thank you so much for having me.